Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Greatest Games podcast on the Blizzard. My name is Marcus Speller. With me is Jonathan Wilson, and with us today is Tim Vickery, long-time contributor to BBC Sport, including the World Football Phone-In, of course, contributor to ESPN, World Soccer, and can be seen on screen regularly in his country of residence, Brazil. Tim, a pleasure to have you on the pod.
Yeah, it can be seen on screen regularly when they find a way to fit my nose on. It's a challenge for some of the technical people.
But it's worth a trip to Brazil, outside of pandemic times, of course, for that in of itself. Tim, today we go back to May 1992 for the European Cup final at Wembley that finished Sampdoria 0, Barcelona 1. Why have you picked this game?
Well, firstly, obviously, because it's kind of almost 19 years to the day since Sunderland won the FA Cup final on this hallowed turf. Let's get that out of the way quickly. But I have both subjective and objective reasons for choosing this game.
So just to be clear, it's 19 years and 15 days. Carry on.
At the time of recording.
No. I mean, this game came 19 years.
Oh, I
15
see.
days
Sorry.
after
Sorry. Yes.
I'm in awe and also a little bit in pity of your precision there, but fair enough. Yeah, I've both objective and subjective reasons. The subjective reason is, well, I was there, and that's always great. And it was probably, I wasn't there as a journo. In some ways, this game does kick off what has become ludicrously my career, because I did do a piece. It's the first piece I ever published, straight football writing for the Spur, which is a kind of football fanzine. It's quite a long article, and I quite enjoyed doing it. And I thought, yeah, that's all right, isn't it? So it's significant to me, but it was just a dream. It was an absolute dream. London had become the Mediterranean. In the middle of a heat wave, it had just become Barcelona or Genoa. That's what it was like. And there's no better place in the world then. If it was like that all the time, I'd never leave. And I was working in the West End of London, so I just felt involved with the whole thing. All the fans coming over, the build up the days before. I was out on the streets watching the fans. The game itself was it was fantastic to be there. It was by some distance, I think, the highest quality game that I'd ever seen in the flesh up till that point. And because I've been over this side of the Atlantic, from 2 years later, I haven't seen that many games in the flesh that have been better than this one. It's just full of stories for me. I mean, I've told this story many, many times, but it's one of my favorite memories. Just going back into town afterwards, the euphoria of the whole event. And I had a favorite little drinking dive, which was a Spanish bar on Old Compton Street. And I'm there. I've gone there in my Barcelona scarf, right? Because I've been to Barcelona, which was quite rare because I'd hardly ever been abroad,
It's pre-EasyJet as well, we should probably say.
Yeah, it was. Yeah. I got a courier flight, so it was very, very cheap. That was in the start of 1990, and it was the first foreign city I'd ever seen. I've been to the Algarve a couple of years before, but and I fell in love with Barcelona, and the people kept on talking about as if I was one of them. I said, "You look like one of us." I think it's the nose again. So I went along supporting Barcelona with a Barcelona scarf. Although it's you don't have that pain when it's your team. Had Sampdoria won, that would have been fine. In fact, I would have preferred a late Sampdoria goal than 0-0 and penalties. But going into this Spanish bar that I used to hang about in Old Compton Street, there's this bloke who's out with his girlfriend, and I can see he wants to speak football, and he's kind of inching across, and he says in taking it as slow as possible, so I'll definitely understand. He says, "I'm really glad you won," and I kind of nod, playing him along, and he says, "I support West Ham. Have you heard of West Ham?" And I say, "Yeah, mate, I'm a Tottenham fan." And he's so surprised he falls onto the floor, and there's people around laughing, and I get talking to these Spanish girls and walking them to the bus stop afterwards. And if I could choose a time, because I'm 26, I'm just a few days away from being 27. If there's a better age to be, then I haven't discovered it yet, and I'm probably running out of time to discover. So it just sums up a wonderful moment The game was a wonderful moment. It was a very happy time in my life. So they're the subjective reasons. From an objective point of view, I think in some ways this is the start of the Premier League, this game. I think this sets the bar. I remember a few months earlier, I've been at a league game with a mate. I think it might have been Crystal Palace and QPR. And it was winter, and the pitch was horrible, and it was a 0-0 draw, and it was just appalling. It was rubbish, And we went back to his place afterwards and put on a video, because that's what you had at those times, the video of England in the 1990 World Cup. I think it was a Belgian game, and we were looking at this. You're thinking, this England World Cup, it's a different sport from the one that we've just been watching, which was just grotesque, and not just because it was domestic football and it was winter. England, just a couple of weeks later in Euro 1992, what a shower of shite that was. Just dull, unimaginative, stupid football. Rubbish. Real rubbish. But this game, Barcelona Sampdoria, sets the bar. It's live on English TV, big audience, and it's a terrific game. And this is what is possible. The game is an example of both excellence in quality players, but also in ideas, in geometry. And nowadays, you lucky people are over there, you can probably imagine a Premier League game with those aspects involved. Then that was hard. And Liverpool played some fantastic stuff through the 80s and 90s. Really, really wonderful football. And Liverpool, the best Liverpool teams wouldn't have been out of place on this field. But that was a rarity, and English football was it had died intellectually, isn't it, in some respects? And this is just showing us it's that great thing when you start traveling abroad and stuff, there is another way to do stuff. Doesn't have to be like this. It can be otherwise.
I mean, that is interesting. So I never actually really thought about that before. I mean, I was aware of the game. I remember watching it. But that is interesting, Jonathan, especially as English clubs had been banned, not that long ago from European competition, of course. Did you see it like that at the time? Thinking that this is like the perhaps a bit of glitz and glamour and culture and quality that maybe we've been starved of for a little while?
Yes,
especially, of course, it being at Wembley.
It being at Wembley. Tim's absolutely right. There's something in the quality of the light that night gives it a sort of magical feel. There's a very sort of yellow light. You can sort of feel the heat coming off the TV watching it, and it's sort of. I guess you do get it around that time of year. The when the game starts in sunlight, and by the end of the second half, as it gone into darkness and floodlights. So there is that aspect to it. I think the two kits are, although they're both away kits, they're both really striking kits for different reasons. I think the Sampdoria kit is just a very beautiful kit. The white and the blue with the blue and black hoops. Barcelona wearing orange is so culturally significant. The fact
it's hideous as well, though, isn't it? It's one of my favourite moments, and it's just so fitting. That at the end of the game they change shirts.
They change into
and they go and get because this is the first time, And let's cast our minds back to an English audience in 1992. People didn't know Barcelona. They knew Sampdoria. Sampdoria were, for the English fan who was into it. Sampdoria were the glamour side because we got the Italian football on Channel 4.
Yeah.
Well, also off the back of 1990, you had a couple of the characters like Vialli and Pagliuca,
Mancini, and
exactly, and so on.
There was this Italian cafe in Soho that I lived in. It was called Il Panino, the sandwich. Which once I find out what it was called, it lost somebody. But
never. It's a bit like Nessun Dorma. Never translate it. It just doesn't feel the same.
Yeah, but you just walked into it and you were in Italy. It was only Italian men, and they were just watching football all the time. If it wasn't football, it was a cycling or the news. All videos of Sabrina, who I'm probably the only one old enough to remember. But I'd never been to Italy. I still haven't. Twice in my life I've had tickets and I haven't been able to go. But you walked into this place and you felt like you were in Italy, and that's where I lived. I spent so much of my time in this. Unfortunately, the owner, he lost the place in a casino the other side of Archer Street. And in the end, some Arsenal beer boy took it over, and all the Italians left, and it was never the same. But it was a great place, and it was where I used to go. I watched so much. I loved Toninho Cerezo, the Brazilian central midfielder, a veteran who plays this game. And you'd go into this cafe, and I'd watch him lining up Vialli and Mancini, because he was their main supply line usually. But also, I used to go there and watch Barcelona, so I knew something about them then. I knew. I remember it was effectively the semi-final. I think it was Benfica, because it was a group phase. It wasn't pure knockout.
The last group game they had to beat Benfica. Yeah, and it was Dynamo Kiev did them a favour by beating Sparta Prague. So it turned out they didn't have to win it, but going into the game they thought they did.
Yeah. In the days when the semi-final was effectively 2 groups of 4 and the top.
And well, I mean that's Tim. You mentioned this being the start of the Premier League, and it's also the start of the Champions League. Although it's not rebranded till after this game. I think there's 2 significant facts. So one is it's the first time as a group stage, the 2 groups of 4 with the winners going through, which actually, as it turned out, gave incredibly dramatic final weeks of those groups, because in the other group, if Zvezda hadn't lost to Anderlecht, then Sampdoria would not have qualified, and they drew a Panathinaikos, which was enough to get them through. But also, this is the last time that the major European final, be that European Cup or Champions League, has been contested by 2 teams who hadn't previously won it.
Well, isn't that remarkable? Barcelona have never won it from the point of view of today's.
So they've been in 2 finals. So they lost in the 61 final to Benfica. They lost in the 86 final to Steaua. But and I think there's something about the rise of Barcelona that they're. I guess they always were a super club, but a super club who actually won things coincides with the start of the Champions League era.
And what amazed me being there, was a lack of ceremony, and I just couldn't believe it. I mean, first of all, it was just thinking back now, it's amazing the ease with which you could buy tickets. I remember the following year I went to the Cup Winners' Cup final, which was Parma and Antwerp, and it was half full. No, it was amazing. I couldn't believe it. Surely, if you're into this stuff, you're gonna go watch this game. So it was quite easy to buy tickets for biggest game in world football probably, and just a lack of ceremony. And I couldn't believe. I was like, we've kicked off. We've kicked off. I was thinking. And these days,
so you need your half hour of Dua Lipa first, do you? To get
exactly. But that is remarkable, though, Tim, because having been to a couple of Champions League finals, one of which was at Wembley would it be 2013 when Bayern won it? It felt like, my goodness, only the World Cup final could top this in terms of pomp and ceremony. It felt like you were at the centre of the planet. This is the most important thing in the world.
Nothing.
Which is crazy when you describe it like that.
These days, when I hate that Champions League theme hymn. It always reminds me of the Hanover branch of the Junior Anti-Sex League. Champions, fucking shut up! I hate it. But at least you got something to mark the occasion. Well, honestly, thinking, because I don't even remember. I don't remember the PA. There was a scoreboard. But I remember when
the classic old Wembley scoreboard with just the dot matrix lights, which half of them didn't work. And
I remember when Barca made a substitution, and I'm thinking, who the fuck? Surely they're going to tell me who this is, And I'm thinking, is this Big Stein? Is it? And I had to find a Barca fan near me. I'm saying, who is this? Is this Big Stein? He says, no, it's Goicoechea. Because you didn't know, they're not telling you. So the lack of kind of pomp and ceremony surrounding the whole thing was bizarre.
Yeah, well, you realise that, Jonathan, the 90s is where football began to look and sound like kind of how we know it now. But I mean, even though this was in the 90s, but as Tim's describing this sort of scenario in the European Cup final at Wembley, it is a far cry from what we know now.
Oh, completely different. And even what happens afterwards when the Barca president Joan Gaspart had vowed that if Barcelona won, he'd go and swim in the Thames, and so he does just go down to the banks of the Thames, and there's these photographs. And again, you sort of imagine now there'd be cameras, there'd be proper lights, so you could see it probably, but it's just sort of a man taking his trousers off on a muddy bank going for a paddle. It's sort of the most sort of, I don't know.
Well, you can see that most Friday nights, Thames in the summer.
I don't know what you do in your private life, Marcus, but there's a bathos to it, and yet there's a purity to it because of that. But it's not this sort of glitzy thing done for the cameras. He's made a bet, so he's going to fulfill the bet, and somebody's taken a photograph, and it's not properly shot, it's not properly lit. It's all a bit grubby and grimy. Yeah. But that's the way it was.
I've got some kind of random images in my mind of the few days around the game as well. I remember the Barcelona fans the night before the game all meeting up at Piccadilly and having a singing session, and it was great. It was fabulous, and the police kind of attacking them, and I went up and had a row with the police about what on earth are you doing? And the police chief, he told me the best thing we could do now is get this lot away to their hotel beds. And it's fucking joylessness. All they're doing is singing.
And also a failure to understand the Spanish body clock. I mean, they're not going to go to bed till 4 a.m., are they? So
exactly.
But do you think? But does that feed into the point, Tim, about the sort of whether it be ignorance or just sort of lack of knowledge of anything going on abroad? Because they think football fans singing, chanting, we're used to. Perhaps the stereotype of the English fans, they'll be the same. Bang, in we go.
Well, and the fans that they were. And I began to understand perhaps different class dynamic, but also different cultural dynamic, because around those days, lots of Barcelona fans would stop me there in the West End and say, "How do I get to the National Gallery? And how do I get there?" And they were taking advantage of cultural opportunities that London was giving them. And I know people who go abroad to watch their team and then just get on the plane, go to the stadium, get back on the plane and come back, So there was a different social dynamic. Although the flip side of that coin, I remember watching parading through the West End some Sampdoria skinheads, and that was a bit frightening. Actually, that was a bit frightening because the original skinhead, like late '60s, there's lots of non-racist elements in there, the connection with Jamaican music and so on. But by the mid '80s. It was really associated with the far right, and you're seeing it with the Italians. I remember this group of them walking down Shaftesbury Avenue, and they're lean and athletic, and to be an Italian skinhead, you've really made an option. It's more of an option that you make. It's more of a choice that you're making than if you're English, because it's not something that's just around. And remembering that these are like Mussolini's boot boys. So that scared me a little bit. So that gave me an extra reason, I think, to want Barcelona to win.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, chaps. Well, let's have a quick break and then we'll talk a bit more about the football itself. See you in a moment, everybody. Welcome back to the greatest games on the Blizzard. So you mentioned the Sampdoria fans, but a little bit more of a word perhaps on Sampdoria themselves, because again, because of the sort of 1990 World Cup and then this game and whatnot, people can, or of a certain generation, maybe think that, as you say, Sampdoria were the big side, perhaps the favourite for this game. Whereas actually, really, this was the best period in Sampdoria's history. I mean, they won Serie A for the first and only time in 1991. They'd won the Cup Winners' Cup in 1990. But really, this was kind of like this, I suppose, the climax and perhaps the end of that period under Boškov, the Yugoslavian coach, who perhaps slightly underrated coach, you could argue, Tim. But it was a great period in Sampdoria's history.
Yeah, do you know why, Jono, they appeared at this moment? Why this is their golden moment?
I mean, okay. What I was going to say, which is probably not a direct answer to that question, is that they only lost 3 games in winning the league, so they clearly are a great side. Mm-hmm. But they also, Napoli have imploded as Maradona's suffered a drugs ban. And also you've had all the tension at Milan, who end up finishing second, but 5 points adrift in a league where it's 2 points for win, because Van Basten and Sacchi have fallen out and Sacchi ends up leaving at the end of the season. So I know why other teams didn't challenge it, but tell me why this is the right period for Sampdoria.
Well, obviously they've got the financial wherewithal to... Vialli and Mancini are 2 class acts, aren't they? Lombardo is a class act. I know people who watched him when he came to the Premier League. Wow, Tonino Cerezo is a legend. And one of the big aspects of this game is that Tonino Cerezo and Baquero almost mark each other out. That's the pragmatic side to Cruyff in this game. his best, his most dynamic midfielder. He does have his moments, Baquero, but he spends the game looking after Toninho Cerezo. And he is the supply line. So that's 4 players who can really hurt you with the ball together. And then the defensive unit, Manini's quick, isn't he? Manini's he's one of those Italian defenders who, as I say, I've still never been. And there's things about Italian football that always strike me. And I saw Arrigo Sacchi give a lecture on this, and he talked about the aesthetic sense that Italians have about everything apart from football. Where functionality. And Italian coaches just go on and on about mentality. And Manini's an example of this, isn't he? Because he's quick, he's functional. He never wants to draw attention to himself, but he does.
Katanets on the other side as well. I mean, Katanets often played as a holding midfielder and would just run all day. And
it's really interesting what they do with him in this game, because once I think Boskov realizes that Cerezo is not going to make a huge impact on this game, and one of the things he does is he sends Katanec. I always thought it was Katanec, but I bow to your Eastern European knowledge. They send him up because he's so good in the air, and he gets, so he at that point in the game when they go direct, they send him up almost into a number 10 position for the flick-ons. Okay. It's one of the little variations you see in this battle of ideas.
So when presumably he ends up being up against Guardiola, which is, you can see why you do that, because Guardiola's not going to win headers. So
Guardiola is, in this this piece that I wrote for the Spurs fanzine, I picked him out. I was obsessed with him because it's my
first full season, right? I think he played 4 games the previous season, but this is his first season as a regular.
And going into the game, especially after watching that Benfica match, he was the one I wasn't sure about, because he was very young, and that position, he had so much responsibility. Barcelona have got things to delight us in this. They've got Alissanko as a kind of non-playing captain, and they've got Koeman as a non-defending defender. So Guardiola, there's a lot of responsibility on him, because he's organising the ball out, but he's also got a cover. I picked. Go on.
Well, on that point of Alissanko, we probably should fill in some of the backstory of Barcelona. So, Cruyff comes in '88, and Barcelona's in crisis. There's been the mutiny of the Esperia, which was the hotel where the players revolted against the board, because, as far as I understand it, they'd been given 2 contracts which allowed them to pay less tax. They got caught, and the board wanted the players to pay the additional tax, and the players were sort of, well, we didn't have a clue what was going on. We want the board to pay it. And Alissanko was the captain who led that revolt. So Nunez, the president, probably wouldn't ordinarily have wanted Cruyff in as coach, but it was sort of a sop to fans who were in revolt. He comes in. The first season doesn't go particularly well. He signs Koeman, who doesn't have a great season. There's a vote of no confidence against Cruyff, which is headed off by Nunez only after they win the Copa del Rey, but I think they're 11 points behind Real Madrid that season. Then 1991 is when they win the league for the first time under Cruyff. But there's been a huge amount of changes, but Cruyff has kept Alissanko because he recognises him as a bridge to the past, as somebody who will bring the squad with him. And then, this is 91 was the first of the 4 in a row. The second comes, I think it's about 3 weeks after this game in the end, because the Spanish season goes on so long. So that's why Alissanko is an important figure. That's why he's there as a non-playing captain. And he comes on, he comes on pretty much as the goal scored, doesn't he? He comes on immediately after the goal.
They're going to bring him on before. They're preparing a substitution. But yeah, so it just so happens that as soon as the goal comes on, it's scored, on he comes.
And he replaces Guardiola for that last 8 minutes.
Yeah, but it's interesting. Before this final, Guardiola, as you say, Cruyff had taken over. They won the Cup Winners' Cup in 1989, beating Sampdoria in the final. So they had met recently in a European final. The coaches were the same. So maybe there was a little something. But again, Tim, going back to your earlier point about people maybe not knowing, that I'm sure that wouldn't have come into the sort of the chat before the game. People wouldn't have thought, oh, maybe there's a psychological edge and so on. You kind of, we've seen these boys, these must be better than them. But when you look at that Barcelona side, I mean, it's easy with hindsight, of course, with these things. And I appreciate that a player like Stoichkov didn't really come into your average English or even world football fan until, of course, the 94 World Cup. But he's there. He was their top scorer that season. You got Koeman, you say Guardiola in his first season, but a player like Michael Laudrup in the middle. I mean, footballing royalty. And go back to Guardiola briefly. As a young player, when you say he's organising that midfield, well, two of the players that he might well have been trying to organise a little bit, or at least say, hang on, I might need a bit of help in here, is Vickery and Laudrup. So not for the faint-hearted, for a young boy to come in and to be telling these players and trying to organise it in a side which, not to the English fan, but to the Spanish fan, certainly a star-studded midfield. Yeah,
it isn't. It's a huge role, isn't it? Because he's dictating very often the first pass out of defence and so on. And the thing that really struck me being there, it was one of those things where being there is far better than watching it on TV, is the conception of space. It's a game about, from the Barcelona point of view, the conception of space and diagonal. Everything that Barcelona do, the ball is moved diagonally. Rather than I always end up having a pop at Graham Taylor. I'm sorry, but the straight line,
4-4-2
yeah. There's a moment that will live with me forever in the first half, and it's a long 1-2 played by Stoichkov. Stoichkov is wide left, Salinas is wide right, which was a surprise, I think, and then Laudrup is a kind of false 9. And there's there's a long 1-2 between Stoichkov and one of the defenders down that left. Stoichkov gets a lovely return ball back to him. And then Stoichkov, which again, all of these passes are played diagonally. And then Stoichkov plays diagonally into the centre forward slot, and Laudrup just fails to get there. There are more exciting moments in the game. There are more moments when a goal is close, both goalkeepers do well. But that was the moment that just lit off a little fire in my head. Just watching the full dimension of the pitch being used with those diagonal passes, I thought, wow, I'm very, very lucky to be here watching this.
Yeah, I mean, watching the game on television as I was, Jonathan, what did you think as the first half sort of going on and so on? Was there any moments or players that particularly stood out for you?
Well, I mean, I guess we knew. Would we have known at this point about Koeman's free kick ability? I guess we did, although obviously the direct impact on England comes a little later. But he has that free kick in the first half. There is that sort of. I mean, I'm sure Boskov didn't need to be warned about it, but there is that free kick that's beaten away by Pagliuca. The pace of Lombardo is a key thing, and that was sort of. You're watching the highlights back this morning. I'd sort of forgotten how quick he was. I knew he was skillful, but I'd sort of forgotten just the raw pace of him.
Do you think that's bald man bias? You think he got bald early on and you think, no, he must be an old man? Maybe that's it.
Or maybe I just remember him at Palace late in his career when maybe he had lost a bit of pace.
Yeah, true.
But he draws a very good save from Zubizarreta. But I sort of... I slightly grumpily went on YouTube thinking, well, I remember this game, just 3 minutes of highlights to remind myself of it. Couldn't find 3 minutes that didn't have some stupid music over it or whatever. So I ended up watching 20 minutes of highlights, and actually was very, very glad that I did, because as Tim says, the general quality is so extraordinary. And although it's a game that goes for extra time and he has one goal, there's way more to it than that.
Mm-hmm. I watched the whole thing, it's the first time. I think I probably watched VTs of it afterwards just to kind of relive that moment. But I'm really glad that I watched the whole thing for the ebbs and flows. I mean, the first half, it takes a little while to get going. It takes a little while. And part of that is the fact that Baquero and Cerezo, the two key midfielders, are just marking each other out the game. So that stops some of the flow. And then the thing that I hadn't remembered at the time was Barcelona come out second half, and there's a flurry of chances, and it's Baquero. Suddenly he's got into the game, and he's creating and he's dynamic, but after that, Sampdoria closed down on him, and they closed down on central midfield, and after that, until the end of normal time, there's only really one moment. It's a big moment of danger for Barca, but it's on the counter when Laudrup plays Stoichkov right channel and his shot comes back off the inside of the post. But apart from that, it's Sampdoria, and all of the chances are falling to Vialli, and he misses them all.
Yeah, it was that great break from Lombardo, isn't there, when he goes past Juan Carlos, puts the cross in, and Vialli, I mean, he has time. He could have taken the touch, but tries to take it first time, puts it over the bar. Then there's two, I mean, not quite one-on-ones, but where he breaks into the box of the defender tight on him, and he's got in front of the defender, and he's just got Zubizarreta to beat. And one of them, he sort of hits it slightly tamely straight at him, and Zubizarreta makes a slightly odd save with one hand, but I'm sure he could have got two hands to it. And the other one, he does dink it over Zubizarreta, but just sort of drifts wide of the far post.
That one, that's the classic Barcelona defensive weakness, isn't it? And Guardiola's done there.
Yeah.
And Koeman obviously is, where is he? So that
it's we're talking of Guardiola as a holding midfielder, and I guess that is what he is. But it's a very strange setup, isn't it? Because there's two wing backs essentially in Eusebio Sacristan and Juan Carlos. You've then got Koeman as the libero. You've then got two fullbacks. I mean, you wouldn't call Albert Ferrer or Nando.
I think
maybe Nando.
You
call
them defenders.
Ferrer. Yeah,
both of them are. It's in the Dutch tradition, isn't it? We're defenders.
And so Guardiola's almost the second centre back, the ball playing centre back.
Yeah.
But the idea that Koeman and Guardiola is a central defensive pairing is you suddenly anything I thought about positions is meaningless in this context.
And well, of course, it goes wrong for them, doesn't it? 2 years later against Milan, when they arrive as favourites and Milan steamroll them. But Sampdoria, I think what they've done is they've strengthened central midfield. They bring on the first substitute they bring on, Invernizzi. He comes on to central midfield, and the little fella Paddy goes out to the left back position. And Invernizzi just gets around, does the stuff, closes down the space. Laudrup finds it hard to get into the game. But the irony is, right at the end, it's Invernizzi who commits the foul, which leads to the debate, which I was having at the time, and I'm still having now watching it. Was it a foul? Should it have been a free kick? But the conclusion I came to, I'm very curious to see if you'd agree, is by today's metric, when almost everything is a foul, it's a foul.
Yeah.
But I was surprised it was given.
I know what you mean. I mean, it's so Invernizzi's on the ground and Stoichkov is sort of standing up, and Invernizzi's sort of hacking away at the ball, which is not coming out from under his own legs. So I think at the very least, he's, I mean, this almost sounds like some kind of rugby interpretation, but he has a responsibility to roll out of the way because otherwise he is obstructing and he can't actually play the ball. And Stoichov's standing there, not able to kick the ball with these flailing legs coming at him. So I think it is a foul, but I know what you mean that there's a lot of games, particularly at that time, when it wouldn't have been given.
Back then, if you were making an attempt to play the ball, that was all that was needed, wasn't it?
Yeah. And so it is a free kick. What, 21 yards out, 22 yards out?
Yeah, I mean, it's in a weird way. Obviously, it's a great strike, but it sounds ridiculous. But one of Koeman's perhaps more straightforward strikes, if you see what I mean, even though it wasn't direct from the free kick. Because I mean, people can forget. Certainly, younger listeners might not realise just how deadly Koeman was from free kicks. I mean,
he's going to flick one. He's going to flick one.
Indeed, yeah. Blimey, nightmares. But it was almost like he had a penalty. There was such... it was a bit like Janino Budapicanu for Leon. There was such anticipation before he took a free kick.
I think he's still the leading scoring defender of all time, isn't he? I think he took Passarella's record.
I think, if you look at his goal scoring record, it is phenomenal.
Over 100 goals.
I think Passarella probably did a little bit more defending, to be fair to him.
Well, yes, indeed. I think Koeman's... Oh, he's way over 100. I think he's He might even be knocking on for 200 or something.
Right, okay.
Incredible. But he scored 17 in all competitions that season. And their top scorer was Stoichkov with 22 in all competitions that season. I mean, Michael Laudrup himself got 18. So he was one less than Laudrup that season in all competitions. It shows you just how important these goals were to the team. But
you're right, there was that sort of sense of anticipation every time there was a free kick within 25 yards.
Yeah.
And I'd have to say, I don't really remember that with any other player since. There's a little time with Roberto Carlos, but we saw Roberto Carlos smash so many into the wall. Beckham for a brief period. It's only 20 minutes against Greece in 2001. Maybe Siniša Mihajlović, maybe Juninho, as you say. But I still don't quite remember the. It was like, I mean, this is such a demeaning comparison. It was a bit like watching Roy Delap take a throw for Stoke.
You're right. That was a demeaning comparison.
But no, you just knew this sort of incredible feat of human power was about to happen, and that chaos would ensue.
I mean, Tim, perhaps we go back to the specific moment when they're lining up that free kick, and obviously it wasn't struck directly from the free kick. Did you think this was the moment? Were you aware of Koeman's?
Yes, and if you went to the game not aware, you were certainly aware with the first chance of the game, which is Pagliuca beating one out. So you knew there was, and from the vociferous protests of the Sampdoria players, you knew that they knew as well. So it was a theatrical moment.
And presumably the thing then as well is they've been running about for 112 minutes on a hot, sticky night, and so to have to do that sort of, the two players try and charge him down must know that we've got this 7 or 8 yard sprint into a cannonball coming towards us, and I can see why if you've been playing football for nearly 2 hours in that heat, you might not fancy that.
Yeah, and that's why you need a Ryan Shaw.
It was hot. One of the images watching it last night was Vialli after he's been subbed, drinking water. It's almost an entire bottle.
Yeah,
he's lost a lot of liquid. It was hot. The thing that I hadn't remembered, because I was so caught up in the emotion of the goal, I hadn't remembered how much time there still was. In my memory of the game, it was like the last kick of the game, but it wasn't. There's still 6 or 8 minutes or whatever left, so there's still game on, and I'd completely forgotten that. For me, like the final whistle came just after Koeman hit the back of the net, and that wasn't the way that it was.
Yeah, but I think it was because the game had gone on, and it was such a tactical battle, and it was so tense, and the whole stage is there. When you get that moment like that, a moment of quality to sort of break the deadlock, not too dissimilar, if you'll let me, the Euro 2016 final when Portugal scored against France. I know that was, in terms of the dynamic of the game, a bit.
It's roughly the same time, though, wasn't it? It was after half time and extra time. We're still sort of 8-10 minutes to go.
Exactly, yeah. But in my recollection, you think, and with the last kick or with a minute to go or whatever. But because it was a moment of quality like that, you thought it's going to be a mistake or a bit of class. You think to yourself, surely you won't get two moments like that. We've had 112 minutes of no goals, and then that happens. So I think that's probably what it is. That the mind remembers it like that.
Perhaps, and also, if I close my eyes and try and take myself back there, I can just remember the Barcelona fans singing "Campeones, Campeones," because for them it was almost as if the world could end the following day. Yeah. They'd finally climbed the mountain that had been there ever since 1955.
Yeah, and I think in the psychology of a club, it is absolutely critical. And I think you still see this with Guardiola now. I think one of the reasons for his bizarre neuroses around the Champions League is his memories of every season before this one, when the Champions League or the European Cup it's the thing that Real Madrid win. It's not the thing that Barcelona win. And one of the first iconic pictures of Guardiola is him as a ball boy in that semi-final in '86, when Barca have come from 3-0 down in the first leg to beat AFK Gothenburg 3-0, and they win on penalties and they go through to the final. And there's that picture of him as a ball boy celebrating after that penalty shootout. And they must have thought, who we're playing? We're playing these Romanians. Nobody's heard of them. We're playing it in Seville. There'll be no Romanian fans there because of Ceausescu closing the borders. This is ours. And they still lose it. And they lose it by failing to score any penalties in the penalty shootout. And so I think, trauma is too strong a word, but it's sort of a football trauma. There's sort of these blows to the psyche that I think Barcelona got into the habit of thinking, it's not for us. We can't do this. There's something stopping us winning it. And I think if they'd lost this game, then perhaps what goes on to happen 14 years later and after that maybe wouldn't have happened.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean,
and that's one of the reasons why Guardiola is so key in the history of the club, that he does it as a player in his first full season, and then he does it as a manager in his first full season.
Yeah, I mean, it really was starting a sort of a new chapter really for Barcelona. The champions of Europe and would go on to be a few times over, Tim. Whereas with Sampdoria, as we say, it was probably the end. I mean, obviously very different clubs with different cities and so on. But had Sampdoria won that game, you never know. It could be a bit flash in the pan. We've seen that with European sides having won the European Cup around that time or in previous seasons. But it could have been so different. But of course, it wasn't. And Barcelona kind of. Do you think that was the moment then that really they put themselves in the kind of the hearts and minds of a lot of people outside of Spain?
Yeah, when I moved over here 2 years later, so many people. This is a Rio thing, I think. So many people were going around in Barcelona shirts.
How much was that to do with Romario?
That's Romario,
okay,
because a lot of others are going around in La Coruña shirts because of Bebeto. It was really strange. Yeah. They were the two shirts that you saw, along with Milan shirts, because obviously they're black and red, which is the same color as Flamengo. But yes, I mean I agree with Jono in history. Also, I think it's such a fascinating comparison between the 92 side and the Guardiola side as a coach, and no one has written better about these trends in the modern game than yourself, Jono. Because what you don't have in 1992 is any real element of pressing, do you? The pitch is huge. So what comparison would you make between the 1992 Guardiola as a player and the Guardiola as a coach from 2009 onwards?
I mean, you can see the same intelligence working in both. I mean, both are fundamentally doing the same thing. They're both, as you said, that it's about space. It's about finding the angles.
Ferguson said this, didn't he? Before facing Barcelona in the finals, he said it's the same thing that we beat in 1991, but it isn't, is it? There are similarities, but it isn't the same thing. And Ferguson came a cropper.
Yeah, and I think, I fundamentally think that. Inverting the Pyramid argues that football falls into two periods. There's
available
pressing.
From all good bookshops.
Yes. So there's all the football history up to the sort of mid '60s, which is pre-pressing, and then there's post mid '60s, which is pressing, and it's obviously not a direct divide. And so Brazil in 1970, for instance, is the end of the old football. They're the last great team of the old style of football. And they can do that because of the heat and the altitude in Mexico.
Indeed.
They would not, we'd already seen they couldn't do it in England when it's not as hot.
I don't think they won 70 in Europe.
Yeah, exactly. And differences in referees and everything else. But fundamentally, that's the sort of period of crossover. And in the 60s, you've got Ramsey in a very sort of understated, pragmatic, non-theoretical way, beginning a form of pressing. And then a very theoretical way, you've got Maslov at Dynamo Kiev and Michalsic at Ajax.
Ramsey fascinates me in that aspect, especially the 1970 side, because his 1970 side is Cafu and Roberto Carlos avant la lettre.
Yeah, absolutely. Even 66, Ray Wilson was attacking for the fullbacks of the day.
Yeah,
but that's the beginning of the great left backs or great attacking left backs. So Nilton Santos, he'd been at 58 obviously, but Facchetti and Marcelini from Argentina, you'd say are the first three great attacking left backs. But Ray Wilson is in their mould. He's not as good as them, but he's not doing a dissimilar job.
And one of the
So-
big forgotten chapters, I think, in English football history is Keith Newton in the game against Germany when we lose. He sets
Yeah.
up both the goals. He creates other opportunities. And with that defeat and the way that Ramsey didn't handle his substitutions very well, he never plays for England again. And the whole thing seems to be buried as far as England are concerned.
Yeah, well, it occurred to me 3 or 4 years ago that something needed to be written on the transition in English football from WM to 4-4-2 from the point of view of a fullback.
Mm-hmm.
So I tried to speak to the 2 Everton fullbacks who did it under Harry Catterick when they won the league in 66 or 66. Yeah, they won the league. And is that true? Anyway, the mid-60s Everton team, and unfortunately, memories aren't there. I rang Jimmy Armfield, who obviously did it at Blackpool, but he was very ill and couldn't really talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, I was too late. I should have done it 10 years earlier, but it didn't occur to me. And I would love to know, because that's the position that changes. The fullback, that WM.
Absolutely.
Back. Anyway, the point I was making before we got into this is that I wonder if post-2008, I wonder if in 20 years we look back at that and say that's the beginning of the third age. And the third age would be not just pressing, but where the first touch is taken for granted. Where you can play 11-a-side like 5-a-side, where the pitches are always in great condition, where the technique of all the players is phenomenal, where you don't have aggressive tackling in the way you used to have, and so you can play a team of 11 diminutive midfielders, and it can work. And the game then becomes much more about how you manipulate that space because the first touch is taken for granted. And I think one of the statistical quirk, perhaps, but something that sort of suggests that, is if you look at every season of the Champions League from the first season when it was rebranded 92-3 up to 2007-8, I think there's either 2 or 3 seasons when there's an average of more than 3 goals per game in a knockout stage. Since then, there's only been 1 when it hasn't. Football changes fundamentally when Guardiola gets that job. I mean, that perhaps is for another time, but that's why Guardiola is so important. He's important as a player for bringing Barcelona at this age. He's important as a manager for bringing Barcelona and the rest of the world with him into this sort of new conception of football.
I love what he did as a player, and I love what he brings to the game as a coach. The one thing watching this game, it's probably a kind of prudish point, but the one thing I thought, isn't this great to watch, is that it's almost like a part and parcel of the way that the game is interpreted now. You got to have the players putting pressure on the referee and calling for cards, and that doesn't happen here. I mean, Manini. There's a moment when Manini comes close to a red. He's on a yellow, and he's a little bit unlucky because he slips and he goes through the man. If that happened now, there'd be a whole undignified run towards the referee, and that's practiced. That's part of the game. If I'm going to have a go at Wimbledon, who practiced it under Harry Bassett, they practiced putting pressure on the referee and jostling. I think then we have to have a go at the Guardiola school for that as well, because it's unpleasant.
No, I agree. There's I don't like that aspect of it. Yeah.
I'd like to see something done to rule that out.
Yeah, but it's got to be blanket. It's got to be universal. You can't have one referee doing it and one not. It's got to be very, very clear.
Gentlemen, it's been an absolute pleasure talking with you about this game. Thank you, Tim, for coming on. What a game it was. And it was just to kind of slightly bookend it with Cruyff and Guardiola. Perhaps it was nice when you hear about those two men that it was Cruyff that kind of stuck up for Guardiola when he didn't have a great start at the Barcelona job and said, keep going with this guy kind of thing. And sort of did him a solid
he did that to him as a player as well, didn't he? Because apparently the first time he saw him, he said, he's too slow. And so Guardiola sort of withering in the youth team. And then Cruyff goes looking for holding midfielder because they failed to sign Jan Molby. Yeah. And he's been told to go to this particular game, look at this kid in the youths. And Guardiola's on the bench and he asks why. Oh, he's too small. Which almost becomes a point of principle for Cruyff.
Absolutely.
I'm going to build a team around him.
It just as well he turned out to be a good player. He could have been,
I think it's fascinating to see Cruyff young, and he looks so young, and it's emphasised by the fact that he's rather strangely wearing a short sleeved shirt with a tie, which always makes everyone look like a school kid, isn't he? So he's looking like a school kid, and he looks so young. But I love
like a warehouse manager, kind of a vicious warehouse manager going around with a clipboard, like pen hands lined up in his top pocket. But yeah, I mean, the thing with Cruyff, he Guardiola now is older than Cruyff was when he stopped managing.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, he had so much left, and yet, he finished age 49.
Incredible. Well, there we are, ladies and gentlemen. For more stories like that, do check out theblizzard.co.uk. Tim, an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you for allowing me to relive my long and distant youth.
Not at all. And the West Ham fan you spoke of earlier, I just assumed it was Ray Winston. So excellent stuff. Well, Jonathan and I will be back next week with another great game from the history of football. See you then.